Okay, I'm coming back for part two for our military related to PTSD. There were a few other things that I wanted to share with you. I think it's really important to look at some of the statistics because I feel like it really helps to put things in perspective and also help with therapy and treatment. So, when we think about PTSD, one of the things that I find is very interesting in the literature is that we find that the medications, let's say for instance, we look at everybody who's had like PTSD, general population, and then also those who are serving in the military. We find that those that are not in the military, the medications that they are on seem to work a little bit better. And also, they're on less medications for that actual PTSD. Whereas with our military, they're on more medications and they're not having as good of results. And that can be even with drugs like SSRIs, which are basically for anxiety, depression, those kinds of things. And so, especially for combat war, we find that SSRIs are really not the ticket. And so, many of our military have been mismanaged with that. So, I just wanted to mention that. And I recognize that the book doesn't talk about oral therapies, it's very much about giving support that you could do from home or very low hanging fruit because I wanted the most amount of people to be able to access that information. But I do think it's really important for a lot of our military. I also really like them to have pharmacogenomic testing done, which is looking at your drugs and your genes to see if you actually even know what to do with that. We find that if you give 10 people the exact same drug for the exact same condition and they're exactly kind of the same gender and age and that kind of thing, that they will not process it the same way. And so what might be really useful for me is not useful for another person and vice versa. So we really want to be more specific, especially for anyone, but especially in our military, because again, when you've had a trauma or you've been exposed to a lot of different environmental chemicals or those kinds of things, is that things can change, right? So then maybe you did receive the gene, but it didn't start expressing until that trauma happened. That's why this is so important, is we want to make sure that we get it right. So what we find, one of the reasons that some of these drugs may not work is because now actually something is expressing. The genome or the genotype is now expressing, whereas before it wasn't such a big deal. So think of it like the last straw event. Like you might have a lot going on. There's like 4 or 5 things. There's a lot of things that have happened in such a short period of time. Maybe they were very hard, lots of hardships and challenges, but maybe them serving in the military, that one deployment was the last straw, right? And so now it wasn't an issue before, but it is now. So that explains why maybe the drugs may not be working anymore. So if they were on something, not working so much anymore. And so I really like my folks that are in the military to get pharmacogenomic testing. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge though. Some docs are not aware of this, but it's trying to target the drug therapy a little bit better. That is if you're doing drug therapy, right? And so we find that a lot of atypical drugs work a lot better. And again, I'm not advocating necessarily for drug therapy for or against. I'm just saying that this is what's out there. This is some of the therapies that are out there. And so if it's not working for you, I wanted you to understand why it's not working for you. And that could be because of now the genotype expressing a certain way, or maybe the way in which you just break down drugs, and that's okay, right? We're all different. And just because it worked for one person, again, doesn't mean it's going to work for another. And I don't want people to be hard on themselves. I want them to have compassion. Each of us has our own healing journey. We just have to find it, right? And so we don't give up, we just keep at it. And so I've had many people who have failed multiple drug therapies. That's why they come to me. And that's why I teach pharmacogenomics. And so we find that they do far better with herbs, or they do much better with other types of support, whether it be through, counseling, if it be through like EMDR that we've discussed before. So I just wanted to kind of mention some of that. I think the other part around our military with those drug therapies is that because these traumas have happened and maybe now they're expressing, they're more likely to then get other disease states on top of it. So diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. What is all of that? It's fight and flight. It's like run for your life, right? So again, we're thinking about the adrenals. The adrenals govern not just our immune system that we learned about earlier. Our adrenals also regulate our blood sugar, so glucose. It also regulates our electrolytes and our hormones, our sex hormones. So if people are having a hard time with libido or those kinds of things, we have to look at the adrenals. We also, if people are having issues with keeping their blood sugar just right, we also have to look at the adrenals or even their electrolytes, because again, all of that is being mobilized for fight and flight, or fight or flight, and survival. So if you're using up all those tools, you're not going to have as much around. I hope that makes sense. And so then the body becomes less resilient, meaning we can set up other diseases, like we talked about immune diseases, or having a harder time engaging with a virus appropriately. Maybe it's hanging out in the system and you don't know about it. You're not even getting a fever, or maybe you're just constantly getting sick. So somewhat similar, we can see diabetes set up, like I talked about. We can also see that higher cholesterol. And think about that. Cholesterol is basically coming from from steroids. The body thinks that it's running from a bear. So the cholesterol is basically going up in order to protect us as an anti-inflammatory option. And so we have to think about that, that again, for our folks that are on drugs for their cholesterol, statin drugs, is that really what is going on? Is it actually, I'm not saying that you wouldn't do it or that you would do it. I'm just saying maybe we're not getting to the root cause of the issue. And so now you're being put on another drug, being in the military. So now you're on 5 different drugs because the blood pressure medication's not working, right? So again, blood pressure is telling you to run away, right? So it's stress. I mean, even by a thought alone, someone could think about having their blood pressure taken and their blood pressure's through the roof, right? So just by our thoughts, they can also control what's happening in the body. Or if you think about a big deadline you have coming up, or some type of training and you're not feeling good about it, you have some anxiousness that can set up. Well, that affects our blood sugar. That can affect also our blood pressure, and can also affect our cholesterol over time. And so I just want people to understand that if they're also in the military and they're being put on another drug, we may need to go further and look deeper into this versus just giving another drug. So again, I'm not about pushing or excluding a drug. I'm just trying to help us understand why someone may be having a non-response, or now they have another illness. Oh my gosh, it's another thing, right? And actually, maybe it's all from the same cause, right? And I see that time and time again. I hope that I'm giving you some additional food for thought related to our military, and making sure that each person is being treated as an individual instead of an algorithm, because the algorithms that are set out many times aren't really working for our military, and we need to think outside the box and give them other therapies. And as I close, I'll share with you some more that have been really helpful. So journaling has been really great for a lot of our military. We see this in the literature and the scientific research. We also see that art therapy can be extremely helpful. Sometimes just getting words to page is really quite lovely. And if it's something that, as being in the military, that you're not really able to talk about, you can burn it as soon as you write it, right? And you don't want it to be out in the world, but then that way it allows it to get out of you. It's so important, again, about regulating that autonomic nervous system and just coming back to our humanity. Thanks so much for sticking around, and I'll see you soon.